Greetings, everyone. My name is Cathie Wood, CEO and CIO of ARK Invest. I am here with our research and portfolio team to present to you Big Ideas 2026. The Big Ideas research report, which is 104 pages long and which we will distill for you today, is, we believe, the kind of research that investment bankers used to do in the 80s and 90s, trying to figure out the future of technology after the PC arrived on the scene. The seeds for all of the, what we consider a technology revolution, the seeds for this technology revolution were planted back then in the 80s and the 90s, and they have been germinating ever since. And now we are in a full-blown technology revolution, which requires original research, trying to reach into the future and figure out what this revolution is going to cause. So we're here to share this original research with you today, and I'm very happy to introduce two of the newer members of our team, Ovid and Shea. They constitute our Multiomics theme, and I think in Europe it's called the genomic theme. We believe that this is the most profound application of AI. Autonomous mobility might be the biggest from a revenue-generating point of view, but the genomic revolution, the multiomic revolution, we think is going to be the most profound application of AI. So I'll introduce Ovid, who will then will moderate this event. Ovid hails from RTW, where he specialized in healthcare, of course, especially medical devices, diagnostics, tools, and so forth. By education, Ovid has a PhD from Harvard and MIT in medical engineering and medical physics, highly qualified as this world of convergence between healthcare and technology evolves. So Ovid, welcome.
Thank you, Cathie. I'm very excited to be here today with all of you, and good afternoon. I will be the moderator for today's session, and we're really excited to share Big Ideas 2026 and also respond to over 800 questions that we've received. It's great that we're able to have a bit of a dialogue today and provide some reaction to some of the thoughts that we've received. We've distilled the 800 questions down to maybe a dozen or so, and looking forward to responding to each of those. So to start, I would love to introduce the broader team that's here with us. And if I start to my right, we have Brett Winton, our chief futurist, Frank, our director of AI, Shea, we've already spoken about, who's also an analyst on the Multiomics team, Tasha Keeney, our director of investment analysis, and Dan Maguire, an analyst on our autonomous team. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to Brett. If you could speak to, actually starting at the highest level, some of the things we're seeing as different technologies converge and leading to what we call the Great Acceleration.
Sure. So we think that there are 5 major innovation platforms that are entering the marketplace today. AI as the central dynamo that's accelerating all the other innovation platforms. Multiomics, where Shea and Ovid are going to hold forth. Public blockchains, including stablecoins and bitcoins. Robotics, including humanoid robots and specialized robots and reusable rockets, where Daniel's going to speak about today. Let's see, can I keep track of everything I've hit? Energy storage, including the robotaxi and autonomous mobility opportunity. And gosh, I think I've covered them all. So these 5 innovation platforms are all hitting critical stages of inflection and leading to an unprecedented investment cycle. So if you look at the kind of acceleration in investment and the underlying infrastructure we need technologically, you have to go back, to the railroad to see a similar amount of investment in technology as a % of GDP. This is not only in the immediate term impacting macroeconomic growth, and that data centers are driving marginal GDP activity, and the accelerating investment in AI agents is transforming the business landscape, but they are also laying the foundation that is going to cause continued economic growth as we get positive return on investment on this technological infrastructure. Net, we believe this will lead to more than 7% compounded growth, real, in the global economy through the end of the decade. And this sounds wild and outrageous, but it's actually consistent with economic history. When you have major technology transitions, that leads to a transformation in the underlying equilibrium rate of growth. Whereas the world thinks we're going to grow 3%, we think that there's strong evidence that there will be an inflection in macroeconomic growth driven by these technologies, all of which are being accelerated by artificial intelligence. And markets will follow the macros. And so we believe that more than 60% of total equity market capitalization globally will accrue to disruptive innovation platforms. And that's the overall message I want you to understand is you need to be exposed to innovation. Imagine having an unprecedented macroeconomic cycle with a transformation in the rate of growth, and you are in a set of core equities that is not innovation exposed, and those actually slightly decrease over the course of the decade as these innovation companies become wildly more valuable. We literally think that's a possibility. And again, it's consistent with history. In the late 1870s, believe it or not, 75% of equity market capitalization in the US was attributed to the railroad. Well, we're in a similar investment cycle, and we think there's going to be a similar enterprise value accrual across the 5 innovation platforms. So that's what we call the Great Acceleration. And now, Ovid, hit me with some questions.
All right, Brett, our first question, and feel free to phone a friend. So we have many friends here if you feel it would be helpful. Number 1, are we overbuilding AI infrastructure relative to energy availability? And what are the implications?
Well, I think people are concerned not just relative to energy availability. People are like, oh my gosh, all of this money pouring into AI, how can that possibly be a wise thing to do? And the way we measure performance against AI is you and I, as a knowledge worker, how much value do we get out of kind of the AI software that we're using? And right now, we think if you're using AI full bore, you can get a 50% ROI improvement on AI. As in, I put in 1 unit of work, I get 1.5 units of output. So I should be willing to pay half my salary for that AI software. Now, businesses don't pay half the salary, they pay 10% of that. But it's still an amazing amount of revenue and an amazing deal for the business. And so with that context and with AI continuing to improve, we believe that there will be literally trillions of dollars, in the central case is $7 trillion spent on AI software, and that's more than enough to support more than $1 trillion in infrastructure build for data centers. Now, energy is in a narrow purpose, sometimes it's a constraint, as in building a data center in the middle of, Ohio, you have to figure out how to get the energy in and to build the data center out. And there's a lot of great neo-cloud companies trying to do that. We don't think it's an aggregate global constraint, but it is certainly a friction point that needs to be crossed.
And I'll just add one thing. The genesis of this question is the tech and telecom bubble and bust in the late 90s. If you think about how to frame what Brett just said, we laid a lot of fiber for the internet age in the 90s. That stayed dark for years. It's only really being used now. Today, every GPU is being used, and there is a shortage. So very big difference.
Yes, even the old ones are being used. And kind of the $7 trillion that I named is just for basically like word-based language models. This is like to help enterprise workers. There's a whole nother, between multiomics, where there's huge rafts of data that we can't effectively process, embodied robotics, including autonomous mobility and humanoid robots. We need more compute. We need trillions of dollars of compute. And so we think you'll see that play out over the course of the decade.
I'll go to the next question, which is, I think, hits on one of the biggest examples of convergence here. How feasible and economically viable are space-based data centers? And what technical and commercial milestones would need to be achieved for them to become competitive with terrestrial alternatives?
Well, so Daniel's the expert here, but I'll take a stab at it, and you can tell me where I get it wrong. Okay, so yeah. I mean, on the launch platforms that are available today, they are not economic. So SpaceX has the Falcon 9. It can land, but it's a limited tonnage that it can loft into space. Once they get the Starship, which is their next generation rocket reusable, we think that the cost per ton into orbit could fall into the low hundreds of dollars. And once you cross that threshold, then actually AI space-based compute becomes cost competitive with terrestrial compute. Now, that's a big deal for reusable rockets because instead of, you need maybe 60 times the launch volume that you needed before. And so it's a nice example of how an acceleration in AI is accelerating the demand for an entire another technology. It's also a big deal related to the previous question, where if people in Ohio are throwing themselves in front of the data center bulldozers, you have an alternative spot in which to put data centers. And so it should allow AI compute to scale without some of the local constraints that may be imposed by political considerations.
And I'll just add something there. Elon Musk says this is an engineering problem. And we've learned when Elon puts his mind to an engineering problem, most people thought lining a car with cell phone batteries was a bad idea. Nobody did it. He was right. He was right. And so we're pretty excited that he's now focused on this space. Literally.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Cathie. All right, Frank Downing, would be great if you could talk us a little bit through how we're thinking about AI, and then we'll have a couple questions.
Awesome. So I'll cover our AI research in a little bit more detail, which we think is this generational platform shift where we've seen these transformations in the past where we've gone from the PC era to the smartphone era, and now we think that AI is powering a new generational shift in how we interact with technology. And that new user interface isn't going from a keyboard to a touchscreen, it's going to natural language. And we think we're going to interact with computers in a fundamentally new way and make controlling computers and technology much more accessible and much more powerful. And we're going to see a whole new array of form factors that enable that. I'm wearing my Meta Ray-Ban glasses today that have an AI assistant built into them. And when we compare this to the last platform shift through the internet age, which included smartphones and cloud computing, we're seeing adoption happen at twice the rate, actually faster than twice the rate, where we've reached 20% of the relevant population in just 3 years compared to 7 years for the internet. So it feels like things are happening very quickly, and we can see that in the data that it is. And part of what's enabling that are the strong cost declines that we see in AI, where the cost to train and infer AI models is falling dramatically. And that allows the technology to diffuse at a rapid pace throughout the economy. And we think this creates opportunities for both consumers, enterprises, and in kind of embodied robotic form factors, which we'll cover in a minute. And just to touch on the consumer, for example, we're seeing personal AI agents be the new first point of contact to products and services and information on the internet, where you're going to ChatGPT or Claude and trusting them more and more rather than going to a traditional Google search, for example. And I should mention Gemini as well, because Google has the second most adoption for consumer AI relative to OpenAI. And we think this creates new monetization opportunities in the form of the subscriptions that you're seeing today, commerce, which AI agents will be able to transact for us and make purchasing easier, and in advertising, as we see attention shift into AI systems. I think that will move advertising dollars into these new assistants that we're interacting with. And I'll just give one quick example of how this is kind of coming together on the commerce side, for example, which is that with ChatGPT, you can now launch app experiences inside of it. And one of those app experiences is Instacart. And I've wanted to do grocery delivery for a long time, but it's kind of painstaking to type in all these different groceries into the app, and I'd rather just go to the store. It's easy. It's hard to break out of that habit that I've had for my whole life. And with ChatGPT now, I tried this the other week. You can take a picture of a recipe book and through the Instacart integration, just say, order this for me. And it gets it 90% right. You change a few things, and as the leaders of the AI labs like to say, this is the dumbest the models will ever be. So that experience is only going to get better, and that creates a revenue opportunity for Instacart that wouldn't have existed before, because that was work I was doing for myself that now I'm very happy to pay for all that time saving. And if I transition now to kind of talking more about the knowledge work opportunity, AI applied to businesses rather than our consumer life. You may have heard, the term agent become very popular over the last year, but also, especially since December, a lot of talk about agentic coding and products like Claude Code that are resulting in a dramatic increase in developer productivity. And I think we've seen this since the release of ChatGPT, that AI is good at writing software. But what has really happened is a fundamental inflection point starting in November, December of last year, where models have been able to accomplish much more long time horizon tasks, which means they're much more useful and much higher leverage on human time. So rather than having to babysit them and answer questions minute by minute or going for 5 minutes, AI agents can now reliably work for 30 minutes plus. And you can see this in various research studies, which we have on the screen here, where the average amount of time an agent can reliably complete a task increased from 5 minutes to 30 minutes over 2025. And actually, the latest data points are now up to 55 minutes plus. So we're seeing this huge inflection point that's actually growing super exponentially, where agents are getting more and more capable, which is increasing businesses' willingness to pay for it. So we looked at the cost of a ChatGPT subscription, which the basic enterprise plan is $20 to $40 a month. With the time savings that companies are reporting per knowledge worker per day, you pay for that monthly subscription in less than a full day's work. So we think there's a lot of room to go in AI monetization.
I was just going to add one thing, and it refers back to the first question. What you just said about reasoning, really taking off, reasoning the long-term tasks, taking off in November. This has turbocharged the demand for GPUs.
Yeah.
So
definitely. Yep.
Great. I think these next two questions touch on both of these. So first, where is AI creating genuine net new revenue versus simply compressing margins through efficiency gains? And how does ARK distinguish signal from hype?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the Instacart example I gave is actually a good one, because that is revenue that wouldn't have existed. So that's new revenue created. Where we're seeing it across public companies, for example, there's a huge increase in demand for compute. We saw that through the chip companies. All of the clouds, AWS, Azure, GCP, have seen accelerating revenues throughout the last few years. GCP is growing the fastest, 48% year-on-year growth for a $70 billion business is a lot of new revenue. But I think the question probably gets to not just the enablers, but the end beneficiaries and where they're seeing revenue growth. And I think a company like Palantir has been instrumental in showing examples of how that's happening, and that's why their business is growing so quickly. But I'll give one which is in the insurance space, where they work with clients like AIG that get more applications for insurance than they can actually process, hundreds of thousands of more applications than humans have time to go through. And there's some way they prioritize that, but there's revenue left on the table. And so now with Palantir's help, they're having AI agents evaluate and underwrite these contracts they would not have been able to write previously, which is resulting in new revenue for the business. And I think there's pockets of that throughout every different business in the economy, where there's things we could be doing, but we don't have the time and resources today to do it. And I think net that creates a AI that is not just reducing costs to operate, but massively market expanding.
So as folks like AIG and now other insurers and other businesses continue to adopt AI, what are the biggest bottlenecks to AI scaling over the next 3 years? Power, compute, data quality, regulation, or talent?
It's another good question, and something the market always talking about what the current bottleneck is. And I think the trend that we're seeing is the bottleneck ultimately being powered on compute. And I'm saying that collectively because I think power and compute were both part of the question. But if you think if OpenAI wants to launch a new product, or Claude Code is scaling and Anthropic wants to onboard new users, they need the combination of GPUs, a data center to put them in, and power on the grid to connect them to, or building their own power plants in the case of XAI. So all of those need to come together. And I think that's the primary bottleneck over, potentially data or talent, for example, because of what we're seeing with the latest models and the research trend at AI Labs, which is models increasingly generating their own training data. So you have human seed and human thought, which is important, but then expanding that with synthetic data generation. And then also the models are involved in finding new algorithmic advances to increase the performance themselves as well, where OpenAI was talking about with their latest coding model. It's the first model where the prior generation played a significant role in training the new model. So that alleviates some talent bottleneck as well, though the talent is very important, obviously, and that's why there's a lot of attention to the talent moving around these main 4 AI labs. So I would put that in the order, primarily compute, if you have the data centers and the power to turn the chips on.
Yeah, and you can also trade off, like those are, it's interesting that people used to talk about, we're going to run out of data, and then chain of thought enabled us to be like, actually we can use additional compute to generate additional data based on the data that we have. And so there is kind of like a trading off you can do. If you run into a bottleneck in one spot, you can trade off one of the other resources to increase the capability of AI with another one of the resources.
Great, great. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Brett. We're going to move on to our next section, Multiomics, with Shea. And Shea, in your section, you did such a great job predicting the questions that I think we'll use your slides to talk through some of the questions. So I'll jump straight to the first one. As AI accelerates drug discovery and diagnostics, where do you see the greatest value capture across the multiomics stack? Data generation, model development, or therapeutic commercialization?
Perfect, thank you. So it's a great question, and I can appreciate the instinct to maybe want to pick one layer out of that stack, but really we see these components compounding on each other. And so AI is really converging here and operating as a linchpin, driving a flywheel in biological innovation. What I mean by that is better data and greater data feeds into better models, and better models feed into better diagnostics, better therapeutic interventions, better tools. And this feeds into more and richer data. So in effect, a virtuous cycle. And so we organize this cycle around 4 key areas here. So one being multiomics tools, so having better data at lower cost, molecular diagnostics, being able to detect disease earlier and with greater accuracy. 3, AI-developed drugs, so the idea that you can leverage these biological insights to develop better drug candidates that can get to market faster and cheaper. And lastly, cure, so the concept of one-time treatments that can target the root cause of disease. And so rather than operating in any kind of vacuum, they all kind of reinforce each other as a flywheel. So this is an important component, why we don't just see it as one layer. And what's really helping to drive this acceleration of this flywheel is costs are declining significantly. So if I rewind the clock back here several decades now, the first human genome sequenced, i.e. the Human Genome Project, took about 13 years to do, cost shy of $3 billion, and that included all the infrastructure to do it all. Today, you can sequence a whole human genome for just $100. And looking forward to 2030, we see this dropping another magnitude down to about $10. And that kind of cost curve really changes the paradigm for who gets tested, how often they get tested, and the amount of data that generates. So consequently, you can imagine that as costs fall, the amount of volume of tests increases. So this is a really important shift, and by 2030, we see that volume of tests doubling. And what's really striking here, what I would point to, is already the total tokens generated, or the volume of data that we have, is already rivaling the tokens used to train large frontier large language models. And we see this scaling another 10x by 2030. So what I would highlight here is altogether this biology is becoming one of the largest data generation engines on the planet, and that's powering a real transformation across the healthcare spectrum.
And if I can add one thing, just as a portfolio manager, it's a privilege to learn all of this, but in terms of the data generation, I asked the team once, how many cells do we have in our bodies, each person? It's 35 to 40 trillion cells, and now we have single cell sequencing. So that gives you a sense of the data explosion that's going to dwarf anything else we've seen in the computing age.
Great. Shea, one thing you mentioned was it's part of the flywheel was the impact on drug discovery and drug development. So this question asks, could AI materially reduce the cost, duration, and failure rate of clinical trials? And what would that mean for biotech capital efficiency?
Well, it really does hit it on the nose, right? So it kind of goes back to this idea that richer data feeds into better models. And one of the clearest impacts we're going to potentially see on that is just the economics of drug development, right? So if I just frame the problem as it stands today, drug development can take over a decade, costs billions, and every 9 out of every 10 candidates that enter clinical development will ultimately fail. Right, so there's a clear problem here and a need for greater efficiency. And the dynamics that AI creates is that you can get a drug faster to market, so you're capturing more patent-protected revenue, and you're lowering costs. And so this has a real compounding effect. And we can see this from our own modeling, greatly reducing by potentially 40% the time to market, and by fourfold the cost to actually develop a drug. So this is a really important shift, and the question asks about capital efficiency. Well, as it alludes to, right, that we have a clear problem here. Returns on drug R&D is historically now been in the single digits. Well, when you take a look at the compounding effects of having faster time to market, lower costs, higher probabilities of success, that really changes that paradigm. And if you take that a step further and you apply it to curative therapies, for instance, that shift is even more dramatic. So while historically early stage assets have little to no economic value, a AI-driven cure, by comparison or contrast, could be worth more than $2 billion per drug. So to address the question directly head on, yes, we are modeling a fantastic and tremendous impact on biotech capital efficiency.
I'll just add one more thing here. Again, perspective. The golden age for healthcare was in the 80s and 90s when returns on R&D spending hit 30%. And now we're down in low to mid single digits. We believe that the returns, and maybe you were going to capture this in the next slide, the returns are going to be, we're going to be back into the golden age for healthcare, which, given the psychology out there right now on healthcare, will be quite unexpected.
Great. And I'm a little partial to this section, Shea, so I'm going to try to squeeze in one more. How should investors think about the regulatory and insurance coverage risks and the path forward for gene therapies as these technologies scale?
She'll do that too. Perfect. Let me illustrate it this way. That's a multi-layered question, right? So if we just break that down component by component. So on the regulatory front, right, particularly over the last year, we've seen a great deal of change occurring. The agency here in the US is called the FDA, and they approve drugs. And so they've really recognized this problem that I just described about how difficult it is to get a drug to market. And so the idea is they want to modernize their own agency. They want to work with drug developers to streamline clinical development so that we can really address this problem. And some of the things that we've already seen translate from that is new frameworks, specifically that are helping rare diseases and therapies that address root cause biology. And so this is one component layer. Another part of the question was about reimbursement and insurance hurdles. Well, now I can appreciate the sticker shock can be potentially misleading. When you see a $2 million price tag on a cure, you say, well, how's that going to get reimbursed? I can see that there's going to be potentially insurance hurdles. Well, let's just ground this back into real world examples, right? We can take CRISPR Therapeutics Casgevy, which is an approved gene editing treatment for sickle cell disease and transfusion dependent beta thalassemia. Right, so that costs are priced at a little more than $2 million. And yet, 90% of US patients have reimbursement access. So how is that? Why is that? The reason is you take a look at that cost, the price of that drug, and you need to compare it to the chronic treatment that a patient needs to undergo, the hospitalizations that they need to undergo. And this value to the healthcare system is what justifies that price. Right, so that's the component you need to understand with the reimbursement. And what this highlights really is that the economics of cures is just fundamentally different than typical traditional drugs, right? So what you have here is a cure gives just a one-time treatment, you're capturing all the value up front. So it's front-loading the cash earlier here, and you are capturing more patent-protected revenue. You're being able to avoid competitive overlap potentially. So that means that a cure can be fundamentally or significantly more valuable than a typical drug, and what we model, potentially up to 20 times more valuable. And to make this really concrete, I'll just highlight quickly here with a case study with hereditary angioedema. So HIE, it's a rare condition that causes painful and sometimes life-threatening swelling episodes. And so today, patients are on chronic treatment for their life to help manage these attacks, and that can range from $10 to $20 million over the course of their lifetime. Now, Antalya Therapeutics, for instance, is developing a gene editing treatment that has shown promising clinical data, and we estimate a real-world price of $3 million, but the value-based price could be 3 to 4 times higher than that, and that will ultimately be determined by efficacy and durability data. And so if you apply this to all the 7,000 patients that have HIE in the US today, that represents a cost savings of $52 billion to the system. So what that underscores here is that even though you have a high upfront price, you can actually have a better outcome for patients, take away the burden of lifelong symptom management, and actually still save the system significant savings. And just very quickly, lastly, on the scaling component of that question, because that's really important, there is a significant change here, and I'm just going to highlight briefly because we have a blog posted on the ARK Invest website, but that's an important shift that's happening. And what's happening is that gene editing treatments are starting to move in vivo. So the idea that you're having edits within the body. And what that's helping to enable is this transition from rare diseases to common conditions, including the world's leading killer, which is cardiovascular disease. And so we show here that you can have a value-based price of $165,000. Notice it's a very different price tag than what I just described here with rare disease therapies, which can be sometimes in the millions, but you still have a tremendous a TAM opportunity. So if you take just the highest risk patients in the US, multiplied by that value-based price, you get a 2.8 trillion TAM. And just to quickly contextualize that, Lipitor was the best-selling drug of all time for many years. And just capturing just 1/12 of that TAM would match the cumulative sales of Lipitor over the course of 20 years. So what I'd want to take away here from the multiomics piece is that really this convergence of AI and biology is driving this tremendous opportunity, this tremendous revolution in healthcare. So I hope that everyone will be as excited as we are over here at ARK about it.
Well, the stock market has not been. It hasn't.
It'll catch up.
I will say the biggest surprise to me is that the insurance companies had no problem with that $2 million price tag. And I don't think the market's even paying attention to this.
Great. Thank you, Cathie. Thank you, Shea. All right, Tasha, you're up next. Tell us about autonomous vehicles.
All right. Okay, so autonomous vehicles. Well, Frank mentioned embodied AI. This is, we think, the first large-scale implementation that consumers will see of embodied AI, and it's already happening today. So we already have cars on the road that have no one behind the wheel, no one in the passenger seat, that are picking up passengers and ferrying them around. We think that, of the players that are out there, one thing that's very important here is actually the underlying cost of the car. It's particularly important in the early days of commercialization because when you have a small fleet and you're trying to expand that fleet, and you're trying to convince partners to work with you here, the cost of the car really matters. But it also matters for the cost per mile. And the cost per mile is what we think will really drive demand here for this technology and this innovation. So if you look at, Tesla versus Waymo, for instance, we're already seeing that, the Model Y compared to the 5th generation Waymo car on an incremental cost per mile basis is over 30% cheaper. We expect that advantage to only increase with the upcoming models. So if you look at the Cybercab versus the 6th gen Waymo car, we expect that to be a 50% cost advantage. So again, that's incredibly important in the early days when you're scaling your platform. But it's also important, to price this, to price these platforms competitively for consumers. And speaking of price, so the lowest possible price that we think that a robotaxi platform could charge at scale is around 25 cents per mile. To put that in perspective, it's less than a tenth of the cost of human-driven ride-hail in Western markets. It's less than half of the cost of driving your personal car. And it's also cheaper than ride-hail in China, which is already very inexpensive at around 50 cents per mile in equivalent. So we think that reduction in cost will enable a great expansion of the current ride-hail market that we see today. It'll make low-cost point-to-point travel available to many more people than currently choose to access it. And ultimately, it'll make our roads a lot safer. But we also believe there's an incredible market potential here. So we think that robotaxis, by the end of the decade, could generate $34 trillion in enterprise value opportunity. And we think that will accrue to what we're calling the autonomous technology providers or the platform operators. These are the companies that are developing the autonomous technology, what actually drives the car in-house. They can offer this, again, through a ride-hailing service, a robotaxi service. And, Cathie mentioned we think this is also one of the largest revenue opportunities out there. So the total TAM for revenue for robotaxis we think could be $10 trillion or above. By the end of the decade, we think revenue and earnings here could be around $2 trillion. And, I won't go through each of the players here on this slide, but this kind of just gives you a smattering of the companies that are out there working on this really across the globe. As I mentioned, you can see at the bottom here that we think the platform operators, the autonomous technology providers, really stand to capture the lion's share of the economics here. That is because these are the companies that are enabling those low prices per mile that really expand the market. We're also seeing electric automakers coming into play that partner with autonomous technology providers, as well as the ride-hail players that are lead generators. But also we're seeing these companies shift their business models. They're becoming maintenance providers for the autonomous technology companies and the automakers. And I'll just say that, we expect this to transform the entire auto industry. We think there'll be a lot of consolidation of today's players that, are operating on legacy gas-powered platforms. We think that the future of robotaxis are electric. Electric cars are very crucial to, again, having attractive cost per mile economics. And we're seeing in the U.S., again, this really nice price ceiling of around $2.80 per mile. In China, ride-hail is much more competitive, and that's driving a lot of these players to move to markets like the Middle East, where there might be greater profit potential there. So robotaxis are already operating today. I'll let you walk away with that. Daniel here tracks every incremental mile that we're seeing on these platforms. And we are already seeing almost 1 million miles traveled on over robotaxi platforms today. So the question is just when it's going to scale, and what enables that scale is, the proliferation of the fleets and that, again, lower cost per mile.
I didn't expect to say anything after everyone, but just in terms of exclamation points, I've been to Europe many times, and I realize that when I am talking about robotaxis and the incredible research that our team has done, that you can't relate to it because the regulators in Europe are not there yet. But we think that they will be because the safety statistics are so dramatic. And so regulators, it would be unethical long-term for regulators to hold this trend back.
Or in the immediate. I think you should interpret some regulatory action as actively killing people.
Okay. I was trying to be a little more diplomatic.
And just to circle back to the great acceleration section, it's like in the U.S., the imputed labor cost of manual driving, for which we don't get paid, is more than $4 trillion a year. So think about that against a $30 trillion U.S. economy and transforming that $4 trillion of unmonetized activity into something where you can pay somebody else to do it at a discount to the cost of your time, and you end up with economic transformation. You take an activity that was previously not measured and you turn it into economic activity.
GDP?
Yeah.
And that kind of answers our first question here, Tasha. Which regions are most likely to enable large-scale autonomous deployment first or last? And how decisive is regulatory alignment to commercial success?
Absolutely. So, interestingly enough, the U.S., because the regulation has so far sat with the states, it's one of the first markets to allow wide-scale testing of robotaxis, which has, enabled it also to be, one of the first markets to have commercialization of robotaxis. Now China is very serious about the autonomous opportunity as well. So we see a lot of scale with Chinese players. So those two markets I would really put as, first to scale. But as I mentioned, in the Middle East, that's also an attractive opportunity, particularly for the Chinese players that might see, greater profits abroad than at home. And for regulation, Cathie mentioned we're already seeing that these platforms are a lot safer than human drivers. Many years ago, we estimated that a robotaxi could be about 80% safer on an accident rate basis than a human driver. And we have the real life data points to prove that today with Waymo and other platforms. Tesla really releases safety statistics on its full self-driving software as well. So we know that it's safer already. So ultimately, the technology is here. We expect regulation to be, of course, important to allow it to proliferate. But we're already seeing it on roads today, and we really expect that to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
We've talked about how regulation can be a bottleneck for this space. So maybe briefly, if you could highlight what do you see as the key bottleneck to widespread deployment? Is it regulation? Is it safety validation, compute, mapping, or telecom infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think the most important takeaway is that the technology exists. So it's no longer a technology hurdle here, but there's in terms of actually getting robotaxis to scale, because right now they're only available in certain cities. The fleets are relatively small compared to what we think they will be over the next 5 years or so. So that involves companies like Tesla that are able to put cars on the road. Waymo, of course, partnering with other automakers. The Chinese players both building the vehicles themselves, but also partnering with automakers. Again, that's where the low-cost vehicle platform really matters there to scale the robotaxi fleet and offer an attractive product to consumers. Regulation, of course, is important, but we already have the safety proof points to prove that autonomous technology is really better than the current situation that we have with human drivers. So really, it's just a matter of the companies really executing on that scale, and with that scale, we expect the cost per mile to continue to undercut ride-hail prices today, and that's really what will expand the market.
Thank you, Tasha. With that, we'll go to Dan, last but not least. From something we're increasingly seeing in our daily lives with autonomous vehicles to something we maybe don't see every day, reusable rockets.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you'll be seeing a lot more of them in the future. So rocket reusability is really opening up the space economy. And 2025 marked really a notable year with annual upmass to orbit reaching all-time highs. And this is largely thanks to SpaceX. So SpaceX currently today has over 9,000 active Starlink satellites orbiting Earth today, and that represents over 2/3 of the satellites up there. And really, why they have this dominance is because of their 10-year lead on the industry. And, well, what do I mean by that? Well, in 2015, SpaceX landed its first orbital class booster. It's executed almost perfectly on partial reusability since, and its closest competitor has just landed its booster towards the end of last year. So while other companies are getting to grips with partial reusability, SpaceX is full steam ahead on full reusability, and that really translates to declining launch costs. So key to ARK's research is the concept of Wright's Law. So in the concept, or in the context of launch costs, Wright's Law states that for every cumulative doubling of upmass to orbit, so kilograms, launch costs is declining by 17%. And SpaceX has demonstrated that with their Falcon 9 rocket to date. According to our research, we estimate they've cut launch costs by roughly 95% since 2008. The consequence of that is it opens up many, many opportunities in the space age. Including orbital data centers, which Brett spoke about earlier, as well as in the tone of convergence, zero gravity testing for medical, which advances a lot of the multiomics space we talked about. And really, that's just today where it's at $1,000 per kilogram. And according to our research, when SpaceX executes on a full rocket, a fully reusable rocket, which is its Starship rocket, we think that could extend to sub $100 per kilogram. And that's really where the orbital data center conversation gets very exciting. And I know Brett's done a lot of research on it. And at that scale point, we think orbital data centers could be 25% cheaper than terrestrial compute. But it's a bit of a journey there, and we're excited to monitor Starship's progress this year. So I think that's kind of like a quick pit stop tour on reusable rockets. I know we could talk all day about it, but we've covered a lot of topics here, and I'm sure you have some questions I'm happy to answer.
Great, Dan. Thanks. So first, has reusable launch already permanently reset the cost curve for access to space, or is another order of magnitude reduction required to unlock the next wave of orbital infrastructure? Sure.
We have a bad habit here of answering the questions before we get to them, but so yeah, maybe just to re-emphasize, because the key here is full reusability. To date, Falcon 9 has a two-stage rocket. It launches and it loses the upper stage. It recovers the bottom stage. Starship's intention is to have a two-stage rocket, launch both of them and recover both of them. And the really key there is it cuts cost by an order of magnitude. We think it'll get to sub $100 per kg. And again, not to re-emphasize orbital data centers, but that really opens up a lot of opportunities, making them economical where they previously weren't. So launch cost is really the key for all of the orbital infrastructure in space.
Yeah, just to also re-answer, but it's going from that, call it $700 for the Falcon 9 to $100 or so from Starship, brings on board AI space-based compute. Yeah. And the satellite requirement for space-based compute is at least 10x and actually probably more than you need for Starlink and for the communications constellations that you have today. And so that alone expands the market by roughly an order of magnitude. And then if and as we colonize the moon or build a moon base and can do mass-based drivers, you can then service the Earth satellite constellation at around $10 a kilogram potentially. And so you're getting another order of magnitude potential reduction in cost to put things into Earth orbit, but that requires a lot of infrastructure built on the moon, and so then that's a whole other infrastructure investment opportunity.
Yeah, I like to say, many people worry about AI and automation, ruining the labor opportunities for labor. We've got a whole new world opening up now. So space, that's one. There's another one too, and it's actually online with blockchain technology and immutable digital property rights. I think we're going to see an explosion there. So we're really excited about the AI age, which we think is going to be a net job creator.
So speaking of net job creation and long-term changes, where does long-term value accrue in the reusable rocket ecosystem? Is it launch providers, satellite networks, or downstream data and services?
Sure. So I mentioned launch providers to launch costs. We think the near-term opportunity for cash flow generation is the concept of satellite connectivity. So you have seen today, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Starlink. They just surpassed 10 million active subscribers. And really that explosion comes back to Wright's Law, which again is key to our research. And we believe that for every cumulative doubling of gigabits per second to orbit, satellite costs are declining by roughly 44%. So a very steep cost decline curve causing that explosion of growth. And really at scale, we think it could be a $160 billion annual revenue opportunity. So that's why you see a lot of these space companies coming to the public markets trying to capture a large portion of that.
Great. Thank you, Dan. We've gotten through all of our sections, and so there are I have a few kind of maybe lightning round general questions I'll toss up to the group, and we'll see who wants to catch it and take it, and multiple folks can weigh in. I'll start with the first one. How does ARK's convergent stack thesis play out from 2026 to 2030 across AI, robotics, energy systems, and public blockchains? And what are the most important bottlenecks? We've gotten a few bottleneck questions today. Power, compute, talent, regulation, capital efficiency.
Well, I think we already answered the question of how it plays out across all of the technology areas. And I will say that there is ARK's exposure to multiple technologies is important from a diversification perspective. So, you could go all in on AI enterprise software, and that might hit a choppy patch. But that hitting a choppy patch should be independent of cures being successfully priced in the market in multiomics. So while AI serves as an accelerant for all of these technologies, they have different kind of commercialization frictions, different opportunities in the market. And so kind of we're increasing the potential energy across all of the technology areas and then trying to anticipate that being transformed into the kinetic energy of cash flow to then get reinvested. And then in terms of bottlenecks, I mean, I do think that the world needs a lot more compute. And so I think that there's, you know, between space-based data centers, which is an orthogonal direction by which you could motivate compute, and the continued expansion of fabs in the US in addition to Taiwan, that we have the chips in play to continue to build compute power, and there's a lot of businesses making a lot of money doing it. So, you know, we're for example, there's a supersonic civilian aircraft company that is actually going to capitalize because its engines are great for power for AI data centers. And so, boom, it has a whole like big business that's emerged out of nowhere to build power for compute. And so capital markets are rushing in to power this opportunity. And we think that's the most important kind of like accelerant to everything that's happening.
And unit growth is critically important, as Daniel said a few times. Wright's law, unit growth. So if the question is bottleneck or what could get in the way, of course, you know, a disaster like a global war that would get in the way. But the interesting thing about even those moments, when times get tough, then companies and consumers are willing to change the way they do things. They're looking for better, cheaper, faster, more productive, more efficient, more creative. So it's an irony that actually, and COVID was an example of this, supply chains gummed up the works for a while, but now we're on the other side of that and moving ahead.
Yeah, I'd say that the biggest competitor to disruptive technology is actually inertia and status quo. Like that's the biggest competition. And so I think, you know, the fact that the world's getting a little shaken up here, the fact that everybody's aware of AI and like, oh, I'm worried about what this means, is causing people to act and kind of embrace the technology. And that, you know, then provides the evidence that we need to say, hey, we need, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars more compute invested here because these companies are short compute they need to deliver the services to their customers.
Brett, you mentioned the worry. That's something that, you know, we've been hearing a bit about, certainly in the past couple of weeks. So what's our view on the future of enterprise software and SaaS in an agentic AI world, including which business models get disrupted and which ones get strengthened?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned enterprise software as like going all in. It's like that's the one thing everybody's pulling away from right now. But I mean, our view is that AI is transformative to software, not necessarily going to destroy the entire incumbent landscape. And that's because AI is making it easier than ever to create new software. Some businesses will choose to create their own software or augment their software with their own in-house capabilities, but I think it's much more likely that we'll see a new crop of competitors emerge from a lot of the incumbents today. So rather than everybody building their own CRM, having many new competitors that are maybe more AI native, more agile, more tailored to a specific industry, that change the forward expectations for revenue growth and pricing power for some of these incumbents, which is why the market is pulling away from them. And we haven't seen some of these AI native companies emerge into the public markets yet, but we're seeing a lot of green shoots in the private markets where you have across so many different industries or job functions, whether it's Sierra in customer service, Harvey for legal, Cursor for software development, for example, just crossed a $2 billion run rate, which, you know, this company is 3 years old and they're at $2 billion in run rate. And in the cloud computing era, it was a big milestone to hit 100 million in run rate revenue. A company like Twilio did that over, it was, I believe, 6 years with 500 people. Cursor has done it in, well, they've done 20 times the revenue in half the time with half the people. So that is the productivity possible, and some of these new software businesses are going to be amazing. They're just not going to be maybe the exact ones that are in the public markets today.
I think it's really important to say that despite what Frank just said, we think that there's an entrepreneurial explosion about to take place because we can all code now, natural language. So go start a business.
And on the theme of the entrepreneurial explosion, I think we'll close here today. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed getting a deeper dive into Big Ideas 2026. If you haven't downloaded it, please do and give it a read and follow up with any of us either through the website or we're all on social media, X, etc. So we hope you've enjoyed the time and have a great rest of your day, and let's go forward with innovation.